Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on From the South. To begin, after announcing that a permanent bilateral ceasefire could be implemented in December, Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos has said he will ask the UN Security Council to verify the definitive truce that would mark the end of the 54-year conflict with the FARC. Now, he made the announcement after meeting the UN delegate to the Colombian peace talks. He added that he will be contacting the leaders of all 5 permanent members of the Security Council to ask for their support in giving the UN the mandate it needs as soon as possible.
Todas las gestiones para finiquitar el proceso de negociación sobre el punto del fin del conflicto lo más pronto. Esperamos que el
We hope the Security Council give us the mandate as soon as possible, while we accelerate the peace talks in Havana to hopefully be able to offer Colombian people Christmas and New Year festivities in peace.
And the head of the Colombian delegation at the peace talks said that any definitive ceasefire had to include certain conditions.
The ceasefire must put an end of gunfights and hostilities. It must be bilateral and definitive. What the government wants is not only the end of the military confrontation, but also the end of extortion activities and drug trafficking.
Our correspondent in Bogota now, Natalia Margarita, has gathered some reactions to Santos's announcements.
For almost 4 months, the FARC have implemented a unilateral ceasefire. Since then, Colombia has experienced a reduction in violence not seen since 1974. That is according to the Conflict Analysis Center, whose director considers it's time to take the FARC ceasefire one step forward.
We are late for the implementation of a bilateral ceasefire. Of course, that needs to be agreed within the peace negotiations, otherwise it won't be sustainable and have the verification mechanisms that are necessary for the legitimacy of a bilateral ceasefire.
The verification mechanisms are among the issues President Santos has urged an agreement be reached on, as a condition for a timely implementation of the bilateral ceasefire that the FARC has repeatedly called for.
I hope that up to the 31st of December, we can, for instance, conclude the 5th point of the peace talks agenda, which is the end of the conflict, so that we can decree a bilateral and internationally verified ceasefire starting from the 1st of January.
The 5th point of the agenda includes the issues of demobilization and disarmament, but also all the technicalities that a bilateral ceasefire will necessarily imply, subjects that a technical commission is dealing with in Havana.
It is a topic that is being discussed, and is crucial in order to guarantee that there will be no hostilities between the parties that subscribe the ceasefire. There needs to be some sort of control and verification, and that discussion has not concluded yet.
Now, the FARC has suggested there is no need to wait until January next year for a bilateral ceasefire, when it could rather come as a good Christmas gift for Colombians, something to which President Santos has reacted positively.
If we Colombians have already felt a reduction in violence, and the last 2 months have been the least violent in terms of armed conflict, now imagine how amazing it would be to have our first Christmas with no arms.
The announcement comes right ahead of the beginning of a new round of peace talks next week, bringing high the expectations of many Colombians. Natalia Margarita, Telesur, Bogota.
For an update on all of it now, we turn to Natalia. She joins us live from Bogota. Hey there, Natalia. The Colombian government has put some certain conditions on a bilateral ceasefire. Can you run through those for us?
The conditions have basically to do with speeding up the negotiations there in Havana, so that an agreement on the point of the agenda that is called literally the end of the conflict can be reached. That's basically what President Santos said. We need to close an agreement on that point so that we can finally have the implementation of this bilateral ceasefire. Now, within that point of the end of the conflict and related directly to the bilateral ceasefire is basically the mechanisms of verification and also the technicalities, the conditions, so that the parties that will subscribe this bilateral ceasefire will have all the security guarantees. And as I said before, basically, Cody, that this bilateral ceasefire could be verified. On the one side, President Juan Manuel Santos has said that he would like and that he will call to the United Nations so that they can act as verifiers. And on the other side, the FARC have said that they have agreed with this initiative of President Santos that the United Nations play a role in the verification, but they have also said that the UNASUR body, the Union of South American Nations body, UNASUR, should be part also of this verification, Cody.
We know, Natalia, that the FARC leader, Timochenko, has complained about the government proposing a ceasefire while they're still killing FARC members. Could this be endangering at all, in your opinion, the process?
Not at all. The peace process, it's not in danger. Actually, this is a peace process that have advanced much further than any other peace process before. The remark that Timoshenko said is basically insisting on that necessity to implement a bilateral ceasefire so that further victims, whether from the civil society or the insurgency or the army, can be prevented. But it's basically about that. I wouldn't say, and no one here in Colombia would consider that this is endangering the peace processes. I insist a way in which the maximum leader of the FARC is insisting once again that after they have been implementing for almost 4 months a unilateral ceasefire, it is time also that the government reciprocate that unilateral ceasefire by finally agreeing to implement a bilateral one, Cody.
All right, Natalia Margarita reporting from the capital there in Colombia, Bogota. Natalia, thanks.
Back to you, Cody.
Here next door in Venezuela, Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro says excellent progress is being made in talks with Colombia to overcome the problems on the border. Now, Venezuela closed most border crossings from starting in August, in an attempt to stop paramilitary violence and the smuggling of subsidized goods out of Venezuela into Colombia.
Estamos trabajando al detalle. Te puedo decir que
we are working on the details, and I can tell you that President Santos understands the issues here. We are close to structural changes that will help towards a frontier of peace. On the problem of paramilitary violence, we share the same vision. Our respective security forces are talking to each other about this, and about cleaning up cross-border trade. I think sooner rather than later, we will have far-reaching decisions, so that we can not only normalize the situation on the border, but in 1 or 2 years, see real structural change.
Estamos acercando una posición. Yo creo que más temprano que tarde vamos a tener decisiones de fondo.
Meanwhile, the government of Venezuela launched a Twitter and signature collection campaign on Thursday for Venezuelans to support a democratic and peaceful electoral process for November. Now, the hashtag #ISignForPeace was a trending topic here in Venezuela. In cities across the country, citizens signed to support a document in which the government promised to respect the results of the December 6th parliamentary elections. Now, during the 2013 presidential election, the opposition refused to accept President Maduro's victory over their presidential candidate, Enrique Capriles, who accused the National Electoral Council of fraud. This year, the opposition MOVE coalition has also refused to sign the agreement.
We are going to do everything we can, just as President Maduro has done, to make sure the elections go peacefully, because that's how we are. We are men and women of peace. I am signing for peace, for Venezuela's sovereignty, and above all, I am signing to support the National Electoral Council. This is the only electoral authority in the world that does so much to teach people how to exercise their democratic rights. We've just had one voting experience and we're about to have another because we really want people to participate.
Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva said on Thursday that he will survive all attempts to discredit him after police raided the offices of a company belonging to one of his sons as part of a fraud investigation. Now, Lula also said that Brazil had no alternative but to tighten belts to pull the economy out of its deepest slump in decades, even though members of his leftist party have opposed moves to cut public spending as Dilma Rousseff, the president, strived to balance accounts in the country. Now, Lula da Silva enjoys a very high rate of popularity, and in fact, various polls show that he would win the 2018 presidential elections if he were to run.
Gabriela is one of the 25,000 foreign students studying in Argentine universities. As most, she has chosen Argentina because universities here don't charge tuition fees and also because of its high quality of education.
The doctors who are being trained here, the scientists, the scientific research that we have here is at a stage of increasing growth which benefits us as students immensely.
According to Gabriela, zero tuition fees means an education system that puts people over profit.
This means that the quality of the future professionals who are being trained here within a not-for-profit education system are professionals.
We saw a story there of Leo Pobletti in Argentina reporting on the state of universities in Argentina. Staying in Argentina now, the president of Argentina, Cristina Fernandez, urges all voters to reflect on the progress achieved in the country in the past years. She said the continuation of this progress will be at stake in November 22nd's presidential runoff. Fernandez spoke for the first time after last Sunday's elections. She said that day will not only be about electing a new president, but about making sure Argentina continues on the path of progress. Her Front for Victory party has spearheaded. She called on ruling party candidate Daniel Scioli and right-wing rival Mauricio Macri to carry out a civilized campaign.
I'm not running for anything. I'm going home. But when I leave, please, I beg you, I don't want to see crumble what cost us years and what cost me, personally, the loss of what I cherished the most of my life, along with my children.
And we're going to turn live now to our correspondent Laureano Ponce for the latest on those elections there in Argentina, November 22nd. Laureano, what's the latest there? We just saw a emotional, I would say, President Cristina Fernandez calling on the voters to reflect on this electoral process.
Hello to you, Cody, and to all the audience. Yes, that's right. Yesterday, President Cristina Fernandez held a press conference and afterwards a little rally inside the government house, the Pink House, where she called for the, let's say, the unity of the Front for Victory as a coalition. And she endorsed the Front for Victory candidate, Daniel Scioli, by saying that we're not only going to vote for a new president, but as you were saying, and as we could hear her saying, but we're going to vote for a model of country that we need for the future. In this same sense, the third runner in the general election, who was Sergio Massa for the center-right Renewal Front, said that Argentina needs a change, but he avoided to endorse either of the two candidates, nor Daniel Scioli, neither Mauricio Macri. He did, however, endorse some of Scioli's proposals, some parts of his platform, especially regarding the hike in the exemption level of the income taxes for the workers, for the high salary workers, and some other parts of the proposals that Scioli has been explaining the last days. Also, some part of this renewal front, some of the most important political figures inside this third runner's party, the Renewal Front, had already said that they would have a very hard time endorsing Macri because they belong to a Peronist movement also, so they will be most likely endorsing Daniel Scioli in their road to the runoff.
On a different subject here, Laureano, yesterday we know was the 38th anniversary of the foundation of the Grandmothers of the Plaza de Mayo Association. How do they commemorate that there?
Well, the Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo held also a little conference inside the Nestor Kirchner Cultural Center, where they, in some way, had praised their own 38 years of struggle for human rights. The president of Grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo, Stella de Carlotto, said that this is not a struggle.
We appear to have lost Laureano there in our in his report from Argentina. We're going to go continue with the newscast now. We'll see if we can get Laureano back on the line. And we stay in Argentina. It's a country that has more than 25,000 international students studying there. And the vast majority are young Latin Americans who go to Argentina to study undergraduate and master's degrees. They're attracted by the country's high academic standard, the culture, and the affordability in economical terms. European and U.S. students, to a lesser extent, are also choosing to study in that South American nation. We return now to a story we were seeing earlier from Leo Poblete Caducci from Buenos Aires.
Gabriela is one of the 25,000 foreign students studying in Argentine universities. As most, she has chosen Argentina because universities here don't charge tuition fees and also because of its high quality of education.
The doctors who are being trained here, the scientists, the scientific research that we have here, is at a stage of increasing growth which benefits us as students immensely.
According to Gabriela, zero tuition fees means an education system that puts people over profit.
This means that the quality of the future professionals who are being trained here within a not-for-profit education system are professionals who will not only want to make a profit from their career, but to serve and grow, seek personal growth and help the growth of everything around them.
Milton, a journalist from Colombia, has chosen Argentina to come and study for a master's degree in communications. It's not hard to understand why he has come this far.
The quarterly fee for a master's degree in Colombia is the equivalent of an entire master's degree here.
But it is not simply an economical decision. Not only is education affordable in Argentina, the quality of its education is one of the highest in the world.
Not only is the access to education a right here, and that this in turn means that in economical terms the investment is lower, especially if we're talking about a postgrad. The quality is very high.
Milton highly values the cultural aspect to living, working and studying in Argentina and says that living in a country that has been a part of the progressive reformist processes of the past decade has helped him to see the bigger picture.
In my case, I had never left Colombia and did not know what it was like to live outside my country. Being here after 2 years, I have the opportunity to have a cultural exchange, not only with Argentine culture, but with other students who are from other countries, and therefore with other cultural practices. There is constant feedback in that sense. It is also the possibility of having much broader conversations.
The Front for Victory governments have boosted investment in public education to 6% of its GDP. Latin American countries with staunch neoliberal economies such as Chile, Colombia and Mexico have completely privatized systems with undergraduate degrees valued at thousands of dollars. It is no wonder that young people from those nations turn to Argentina for a brighter future and a great lifestyle on the side. Leo Poblete Caducci, Telesur, Buenos Aires.
As we approach the Day of the Dead celebrations, journalists murdered in the last decade in Mexico are being honored at the capital's Museum of Memory and Tolerance. Now, with help from journalism advocacy group Article 19, the museum inaugurated an altar to call to the respect of freedom of expression and to create awareness about the risk faced by journalists while carrying out their jobs. 32 journalists have been killed in Mexico since 1992, where the Committee to Protect Journalists was founded. The country ranks 7th on the list of countries throughout the world that have seen the most murdered journalists since that date.
An altar to honour murdered journalists should not exist. It's an extraordinary thing. It speaks volumes about the state of violence we're living in. Hopefully next year we will be able to dedicate this altar to our grandmothers, to the dead we remember with love and nostalgia and not those whose departure was premature.
The Honduran military has begun evicting hundreds of campesinos in the forest reserve of Rio Platano. The authorities say the farmers' agricultural activity threatens to destroy the biosphere site, which was put on UNESCO's World Heritage List in 1980. Now, Rio Platano is considered the Amazon of Central America. The area has lost 36,000 hectares of forest in the last 5 years, but the peasants say they have nowhere else to go. 8 people were arrested in the raids. And also in Honduras, rights groups protested against the International Court of Justice's decision to not investigate the 2009 coup d'etat that overthrew elected President Manuel Zelaya. Rights organizations and social movements called for an independent international body backed by the UN to investigate human rights abuses related to that coup. Another prisoner has been released from Guantanamo Bay. We'll find out who it is and the details surrounding his release when we come back. In the last few minutes, the United States has announced it will be sending 50 military advisors to Syria to train and assist anti-government armed groups on the ground. Now, this is high-level talks in Austria, went not a second day with the aim of resolving the conflict in Syria. Now, the talks have brought together all of the foreign powers backing rival sides in Syria's civil war, including for the first time both Iran and Saudi Arabia. Many countries have rejected further armed intervention in the Arab country, including Germany and China.
So we're gathered here this morning to see if there is any scope for bridging the gap that we know exists between the Russian-Iranian position on the one hand and the position adopted by most of the rest of the countries represented on the other. This is an exploratory discussion. We want to see if there's a way forward, if there's a way of establishing a process which can end the suffering and the killing in Syria. We will sit down now and explore the views of everybody around the table and see if there's a way to go forward.
Syrian government airstrikes in a suburb of Damascus are reported to have killed at least 47 people. Over 100 more were injured in the busy market area of Douma. The opposition-held suburb has been under intense government attacks for weeks. People are still being pulled out of damaged buildings, so the toll is expected to rise. The conflict between a Saudi-led alliance and the Shiite Houthi forces in Yemen continues, and the civilians are the principal victims in the war-torn country. Now, according to local monitoring groups, at least 1,300 people have been killed in recent weeks as fighting around the southern city of Taiz intensifies. The civilian victims killed were over 190 children, while over 6,000 have been injured. Around 21 million people are in urgent need of aid in Yemen, while reports say at least 45 Houthi fighters and 8 Hadi loyalists have died in the latest battles. On Thursday, Doctors Without Borders called for clear and transparent answers following that bombing that destroyed a hospital in the Hayden district in Yemen. On Wednesday, Saudi Arabia denied that their coalition was involved.
It's very clear that the hospital was bombed by an aerial bomb, and so from a bomb from the coalition. Only the coalition is occupying the skies of Sada.
Israeli police have killed a Palestinian youth and critically wounded another at a West Bank checkpoint. Now, the incidents occurred after an alleged stabbing attack. Israeli police claim that the 2 Palestinians they targeted earlier this Friday approached the checkpoint on a motorbike carrying knives. The latest attack spurred around 500 Palestinians to protest where they clashed with Israeli forces. One protester was shot in the chest by an Israeli soldier. Many Palestinians were injured and at least 6 others were arrested. Another day of rage has been convoked for this Friday.
It is Friday here in the Palestinian territories today, and this day is known to be a holiday for the Palestinian people, so they organize protests and also rallies. They named today, Palestinian officials named today as the day of rage as the past Fridays. So the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip and also in the West Bank marched and started clashing with the Israeli forces. Here in the Gaza Strip, there was at least 30 injuries reported. At the same time, in the West Bank, there was several Palestinians killed. However, we do not have an exact number until now, but the Palestinian media reported from the West Bank that the Israeli forces attacked Palestinian journalists that were covering the clashes, and also they attacked the ambulances and the rescue teams.
At least 21 migrants, many of them children, have drowned trying to reach the Greek islands from Turkey after 2 boats sank overnight. Now, the first incident took place near the island of Klamnos when a large wooden boat capsized due to the windy weather conditions and sank, killing at least 18 people. Another small boat overturned near Rhodes Island, where 3 people died and 3 others are feared missing. At least 144 people were rescued from the water. In the wake of the latest tragedies at sea, Greece's Prime Minister expressed shame at the EU bloc's inability to effectively address the crisis.
These days, the waves of the Aegean aren't just washing out dead refugees and dead children on our shores. They're washing out European civilization itself.
Tonight, they were forced to spend the night either in heated tents or in the open overnight at the border between Slovenia and Austria. Some refugees who spoke to the press there explained that they were not provided with enough food or water and are desperate to leave the refugee camp. Shakir Ahmed, who was the last British resident held in Guantanamo Bay, is to be released from the facility, and he has arrived already in the UK. Now, Ahmed, who was never charged, was detained for 13 years over allegations he had led a Taliban unit and had met Osama bin Laden. Now, Downing Street said there were no plans to detain him, but also said any necessary security measures will be put in place. According to Ahmed's lawyers, he will need medical and mental assessments as he may be suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. In Ukraine's eastern Lugansk region, 2 people were killed and 8 wounded in an overnight blast at an arms depot there. The Defense Ministry said the explosion at the ammunition depot is being investigated as a terrorist act. Now, they added that the fire was started by a flare that fell onto the territory from outside the base. The ministry did not say who it suspected was behind the alleged attack. With just over a week before Myanmar holds key elections, a candidate of the country's opposition party was wounded in a knife attack while he was touring a township. 3 other party members suffered minor wounds. There was no clear reason for what exactly motivated the attack. Political tensions are currently high in Myanmar, where the opposition is contesting nationwide elections for the first time in 25 years. The United States will continue to navigate international waters. Now, that statement came from the chief of U.S. naval operations following anger from the Chinese over the sailing of a U.S. destroyer close to China's artificial islands located in the South China Sea. A Pentagon spokesman said Admiral John Richardson and Admiral Wu Xingli had an hour-long call where they discussed the freedom of navigation operations, the relationship between the 2 navies, among other relevant topics. Immigration policy has become one of the most prominent domestic policy issues in the United States. Violations of immigrants and the significance of this subject during the upcoming presidential campaign are topics that continue to spark national debate there in the country. Bianca Perez now reports.
Improving the way in which our country
A group of lawyers, immigration experts, and university students gathered in Washington, D.C. to discuss the importance of immigration policy in the United States.
It is disappointing that Congress has not acted on comprehensive immigration reform. It is disappointing that the Senate passed a good comprehensive immigration reform bill in 2013 by a significant bipartisan margin, but that the House has not done the same thing to fix our broken immigration system.
The treatment received by 1,700 mothers and children currently housed in immigrant detention centers has been heavily criticized multiple times by members of Congress as well as immigrant rights advocates.
DHS is very committed to detaining, certain immigrants while they're in removal proceedings, and they're fighting for the ability to keep detaining mothers and children who are arriving from Central America because they believe that that's a key part of their enforcement package. And I think it's very hard to have large-scale detention programs that that don't ultimately look like jails and that aren't problematic. And a lot of them are managed by private prison contractors that have a profit motive.
Aspiring presidential candidates from both parties have been quick to put forward their positions on immigration reform. These range from building a wall along the border to mass deportation, and some who have no concrete ideas. Recent polls demonstrate that the issues become personal for Latino voters, as 61% of these voters know someone who is undocumented.
The Republican nominee, if it's somebody who's a real hardliner, then they will clash very strongly with the Democratic nominee, and it will be very much an ideological battle. Do you crack down on illegal immigration, and do you try and make sure that as many people who are here in an unauthorized status leave, or do you come up with a rational way to legalize them in some way that people would call amnesty?
It is expected that 15 million Latino voters will be voting in the 2016 presidential election. This is 3.5 million more than the Latinos who voted in the 2012 election. Bianca Perez, Telesur, Washington, D.C.
That's what we're covering on this Friday afternoon here from Caracas. Plenty more on all of those stories and others at our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Cody Weddle. Have a great Friday. Have a great weekend.